This could very well be the new best all-terrain tyre available to buy. It is the Pirelli Scorpion XTM AT, and in this video I will be telling you all about the new tyre and comparing it to this, the BFGoodrich All-Terrain KO3. If you don't know much about the KO3, well, go watch my previous video about it, but in short, it's widely regarded as one of the best tyres on the market in the all-terrain segment. It brings great comfort, low noise on the road, and very good off-road traction, and it's right at the front of snow performance for an all-terrain tyre, which is why I've used it as a benchmark. This is the Pirelli Scorpion XTM AT, as I've already said. Pirelli might not be the first company that springs to mind when you think of all-terrain tyres, but that's because the predecessor, the Scorpion AT Plus, well, it was a very good tyre, it was very good on the road, it had good wet grip, it was good for OEs. It wasn't really developed with the American market in mind. The new XTM has been. You can tell just by looking at it. It is vastly more aggressive, and it's gone through a lot of testing in the US, so this should fit this market incredibly well. Not only does it look the part, according to the data from the launch event, this tyre might just beat this tyre in every single measurable category. There was a slide from the launch event that really caught my attention. I'll put it on screen now. Essentially, it shows the old AT Plus in black, the new XTM in yellow, the XTM Elect in green. Yes, there is an electric version of this, and two competitors. Now, Pirelli didn't go as far as to tell us what the competitors are, but they said it's two leading competitors. And looking at how the spider charts plot, my guess is the BFGoodrich and the Falcon, but we don't know whether it's the KO2 or the KO3 or the AT3W and the AT4W. Either way, if the spider chart is correct, the new XTM blends the best bits of two leading competitors, making it the better tyre in the dry, wet, snow, mud, grass, and has a lower noise and a lower rolling resistance, which is quite a claim. Pirelli are saying this tyre is the best bits and more of the two best and most popular options on the market. The chart also lets you see the trade-off between the Elect version and the regular version of the XTM, with the Elect version naturally having lower rolling resistance by quite a significant margin actually, which is great for electric vehicles, but it does trade off some mud performance. Everything else seems to be identical, apart from maybe the price. I think the Elect version is going to cost a little bit more. Obviously, all of this data is based on Pirelli's own internal development data. And while they do have teams of lawyers ensuring everything they put out to the public is legitimate and true, I'm still not the kind of person that believes other people's data. I like to get my own data. Full tests, full all-terrain tests take a huge amount of work to arrange, and I am working on a full test. But because Pirelli said not only is this objectively good, this is subjectively great, so it has better steering response and handling, I was really keen to try it. So I got a set of the KO3s, I got a set of the ATMs, I borrowed a Bronco, and I've done some on-road and off-road testing, which we'll get to in a very short second. But first, there are actually some quite interesting statistical differences between the XTM and the KO3. The XTM is warranted for 55,000 miles, whereas the KO3 is 50,000 miles, even though the KO3 does have a higher starting tread depth. The XTM is the slightly wider tyre. These are obviously both the same size. However, the KO3 is significantly heavier, and weight in off-roading is actually very important because it just gives your suspension. If you're at high speed off-road, your suspension's doing a lot of work anyway. So the weight saving on this is a big win for the Pirelli. Both these tyres are of course snow rated. As you've seen from the spider diagram at the start, Pirelli think this is the better tyre in the snow. I will be testing it in the future. And pricing wise, Pirelli say, I've not checked this online yet, but Pirelli say the XTM should be slightly cheaper than both the Falcon and the BFGoodrich, but we'll see how that plays out. So how do these two tyres behave on the road? Now, you might be thinking these are all-terrain tyres, get to the off-road section, but the data shows us this category of tyre spends a lot of time on the road, so I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about them, maybe not a lot. This isn't a full test. I'm not giving you braking data or handling data. What I am giving you is subjective impressions for noise, comfort, and steering response and balance of the vehicle, which is basically everything you notice when living with the tyres day to day. Now, the BFGoodrich All-Terrain KO3 TA, we know from previous tests, this tyre is excellent on road in terms of noise and comfort. In terms of the noise, it's just very quiet on all surfaces, and the comfort levels, it does a very good job, better than any all-terrain tyre I've ever driven, of rounding out big impacts. So when you hit something, the tyre takes the edge off it. It takes that harshness out of the impact. The flip side is, on a road like this, which I actually spend most of my time on, it doesn't have big impacts, but it has lots of little imperfections and judders. What you find is the BFGoodrich it doesn't control the damping of the tyre particularly great, especially out of these two tyres. And there's just lots of tremors moving through the vehicle. On a Bronco like this, you do feel it even with that suspension. The Pirelli, on the other hand, now the Pirelli Scorpion All-Terrain Plus, which was the predecessor, the size I tested the one time I've driven on it, I didn't find it wonderful in noise and comfort, but that tyre was very road biased, and lots of people have told me it is very good on the road. How does the new tyre move this on? Because obviously it looks way more aggressive than its predecessor to get that American market and that better off-road performance. It does things slightly differently. It is firmer than the BFGoodrich, and you might be thinking, oh, firmness, that's a bad thing, it makes everything more crashy. But it's firmer on initial impact, and then it settles, so the tyre settles after the impact, so you don't have this sort of constant juddering after an impact. And it's kind of like, I'm not saying one's better than the other in comfort, they're just a little bit different. If you live in an area with lots of smooth roads with big holes in them, then I think the BFGoodrich is the better tyre in comfort. But conversely, if you spend a lot of time on this kind of road with just sort of like minor bumps and imperfections and surface irregularities, I think the Pirelli does a slightly better job overall. So of the two in comfort, I think because of the different nature of it, I'm gonna have to call that a draw. Next up, noise. Now we all know all-terrain tyres can become incredibly noisy and almost distressing, especially as they wear. And I'm only doing testing at new state, so you'll have to tell me once you've used these in the future how they are at worn state. But again, it's kind of 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. We've driven mostly on 3 different surfaces. And on the first surface, I did the BFGoodrich first. I was like, well, this is nice and quiet. Then I switched to the Pirelli. I was like, oh, okay. The decibel level was only slightly higher, but the pitch was higher. And I was like, oh, that's not the best quality of noise. Pitch being higher, that is a little bit intrusive. Then we got to the second surface, and I was like, huh, the Pirelli's a little bit quieter on this one. I think the tone was about the same for both of them, but the Pirelli decibels level, we're talking small margins, was a little bit quieter. And then the third surface, I couldn't tell any difference. So I think if my gut's telling me if noise is your only priority, the BFGoodrich is going to have a tiny advantage based on the surfaces I've driven on, but generally it's very close. So it's close in comfort, close in noise, and the third one is steering reaction and how the thing feels when you're turning and how the tyre handles the weight of the vehicle. And I'm in a Ford Bronco, it's not the lightest vehicle. This is where Pirelli does have an advantage. The BFGoodrich, where perhaps it's focused a little bit more on comfort and maybe off-road pliability, I've not done the off-road comparison yet, when you turn, like initially around center, there's almost no reaction, which I'm not saying it's bad for this class of tire, but if you enjoy driving, you will find that as a slight negative. And then as you're doing turning, I'm on the Pirelli right now, but as you're turning on the BFGoodrich, it just kind of, it turns, settles. If there's any undulation, you can feel the car rolling around on the tire and it's not settling. So it doesn't give you like a huge amount of confidence in the corners. I'm saying this on a straight road now, timing. Whereas the Pirelli, I went from the BFGoodrich to the Pirelli and immediately like, ooh, this Bronco's turned into a Bronco RS. Like suddenly it feels more sporty, but it doesn't feel more nervous in a straight line. It's not like I'm having to make lots of tiny corrections to keep the car in a straight line, which is exhausting, or I'm thinking about, oh, I'm oversteering or anything like that. It's just more predictable and more reactive while keeping that. The big thing you've also find with wide all-terrain tires, these are 285 wides, is like cambering, like with the road surface, with the road camber, like tracking left and right. And I didn't notice that on either of them. And normally on a slightly stiffer tire, you do notice that more. So I'd say comfort's a draw. Noise, slightly towards the BFGoodrich, and then steering swings back more towards the Pirelli on the road. And I'm not saying the BFGoodrich is bad. Perhaps you want that really lazy driving experience and you don't mind lock to lock and you're never loading it up in the corners, so you don't mind the undulations and the instability on the tire, or the slight instability on the tire. But honestly, if you were scoring this for like an OEM, I think the Pirelli would be significantly ahead. And for the way I like driving, they've done a really, really good job for the on-road steering reactions. The blend of qualities on this new Pirelli is very impressive on-road. But this is an all-terrain tire, So let's see how it is off-road. Okay, how are these two all-terrain tyres on all terrains? Well, I've had a very lovely afternoon finding out, driving on sand, rock, deep gravel, massive bits of gravel, boulders. It feels like I've done everything I possibly can to puncture these tyres, and both of them have been absolutely excellent. No damages, almost no marks on any of the tyres. I don't really know how it's done, and this Bronco's done extremely well. Anyway, the differences. A bit of bookkeeping first. I did the roads pressure at stock pressures, which was 39 psi in this Bronco, and on the off-road section I've dropped down to 25. Now I could have gone lower. In fact, someone was telling me just the other day that they've been running this Pirelli at about 14 psi doing sand dune stuff, which is really low without bead lock, and it's been absolutely fine. And they were one of the testers for this tyre for very early on. They've run it for 6 months and had no problem. So obviously the bead technology Pirelli have used is excellent. I'm sure it'd be the same on the BFGoodrich, I'm not saying otherwise. Anyway, at this lower pressure, the 25 psi, you didn't really notice the comfort advantage on initial impact that the BFGoodrich had on the road. So the comfort levels on all of this jiggly stuff was broadly similar. I couldn't tell any differences. Traction and braking, which is obviously key for these tyres. Again, maybe on sand, initial bite, the advantage went to Pirelli. But honestly, again, these aren't controlled circumstances. This isn't an official objective test. This is subjective, and I'm very happy with both tyres subjectively in traction and braking. They bite, they give you more grip than you ever thought was possible, especially on sand. I'm really impressed on both of them on sand. But yeah, good tyres. However, the third quality of a tyre, I guess, off-road, steering. That's where I did notice some differences. And it kind of falls in line with what I noticed on the road, and I've noticed about the KO3 and other tests. The KO3 just isn't as eager to turn as some of the other tyres, especially on looser surfaces. So as you turn on the BFGoodrich, you kind of like turn, and then you're like, ooh, I want to turn more, and then you're steering more, and then it loads up, and when it's loaded up and settled, it kind of has good grip. So then you find yourself having to wind off some steering lock, and you're like, oh, so you're always correcting the car a little bit. And it's not what I would call super confidence inspiring. The Pirelli, on the other hand, well, like on the road, it turned, you turn, it turns. No grumbles, it just went in the direction. It felt, I'm not gonna say sporty, but that's wrong, more reactive and more predictable, especially at higher speed on the looser surfaces. And the other thing I noticed is when you're bamming around on these slightly channeled out grooves, and you've got little grooves either side you want to sort of lift yourself out to, the Pirelli did a much nicer job. You could just steer it out of the groove and it would come up easily, and then you'd be on top exactly where you want it to be. Whereas the BFGoodrich, you felt like you had to kind of yank the steering to get it to turn and get it to sit up on the groove, and then it was just a bit more work. So, while both the tyres, again, probably had exactly the same levels of grip, or very, very similar levels of grip, the Pirelli was easier, more confidence inspiring, more predictable when turning, which just meant you were, I'm sure if I was doing lap time, I would be faster on the Pirelli just because of that confidence issue. Past yaw at slip angles, we haven't done a huge amount of sliding around, but we've done enough to know that the Pirelli, when your rear wheels are spinning, I've done all my testing in rear-wheel drive only because I like the safety net of if I get stuck, I can stick it into 4. And also it's more fun, so why wouldn't you? The Pirelli, once you've span up the rear wheels, it kind of slided more predictably than the BFGoodrich. So the yaw at the rear axle, it kind of came out, it was controllable. You still had this lateral, what's the term I'm looking for? I guess grip. You had this lateral grip even when sliding that was easier to control than the BFGoodrich. The BFGoodrich would, maybe it took slightly longer to break traction on the rear axle, but when you had, it would come around pretty quick and you'd have to grab it pretty quickly. So as it was sliding at the rear axle, I guess like the front axle, it just didn't quite have the bite. But as always, these are two premium tyres that are at the very front of the category. I'm splitting hairs. They are both excellent. You're not going to be unhappy with either of them. I'm mega impressed the car and the tyres have lasted on this surface because some of these boulders are just knives and they're huge. and I've really not been caring too much because I've got the safety net of another set of wheels and tyres. They're both excellent, but I think the Pirelli overall in this test has the advantage by the smallest margin. So there we have it. Subjectively at least, the new XTM does look incredibly promising. As I've already said, I am going to reserve my judgment for the full test, which I will be doing in the future, so subscribe for that. But for now, I want you to do me a favor. Go and buy this tire, run it for a few thousand miles, and let me know what you think of it and how it compares to your previous all-terrain tires. It is incredibly useful. You can go and review your tires over at the Tire Reviews website. It really helps out the channel, or just leave your thoughts in the comments below because people do read them. As always, if you've got any questions, please ask below. I'll stay in the comments for as long as possible, and safe motoring.